So the open lineage family, it's the earliest type of family that Lawrence Stone discusses. He gives the dates between 1450 and 1630, more or less, as I said. This is basically speaking the feudal family. This is the family which is very different from the modern contemporary forms of family life and even the 19th and 18th century. This is the result of the feudal system of economy and the way that people lived then. The words are quite meaningful. The open lineage, the open lineage. Open, it means that all levels of society, this family was not closed. It was open to external influences. External influences could be different in different social classes. So for the rich, for the aristocracy, this would mean the clan. This would mean the extended family, the kin. Also the feudal lords. So we have the concept of feudalism and usually the kind of protection and system of loyalty that was induced by an overlord and his vassals, and the vassals' families of course had to pay attention to everything that the lord was saying. In the other social groups such as the peasantry, the laborers, the artisans, the city dwellers, we can't really talk about the middle class yet, but we have, let's say, the lower sections of the society, people living in towns, people, farmers working the land. This would mean being open to the local community, to the neighbors, also to distant kin. So they think in terms of clans rather than families, but also local community, especially the neighbors, the villagers from your village, the people from your town, also your colleagues, let's say, doing the same kind of craft. So that's what we have. Within the nuclear family, that is the immediate family of parents and children, the boundaries were weak. So basically, people did not get attached too much to their immediate relatives for the reasons I already mentioned a while ago. So we have the nuclear family, of course, because people married and had children, but they are at the core of a very dense network of lineage and kin. What families are about, and the major preoccupation, the major reason of having families, is property and status. Preservation, increase, transmission of property and status. The common practice in this period is the dowry system. A dowry was a sum of money that a young woman coming to her husband's family as the bride brought with her. So in many cultures it's done differently. So you might have a bride price, so rather that the family of the bridegroom have to pay some sort of compensation to the family of the bride. In the Western countries, mostly in Britain, also in France, it was the other way around. The dowry system meant that the bride brings the money. So having daughters was an economic drain for the family, because sooner or later you would have to give them money to be married. The money in this period went directly to the groom's father. So the bridegroom never saw any of the money that his wife brought. The money in the 16th, 17th century went directly to the groom's father, so the leader of the clan, the head of the clan. In return, there was some guarantee of protection if the woman became a widow, but it was all at the mercy of the head of the clan. So what we have is a great power of the head of the family. The children and other relatives were basically at his mercy. Marriages were arranged by parents and never children themselves. There is something that Stone calls strong class endogamy. Endogamy means marrying within your social circle, within your social class. Exogamy means marrying outside your social circle. So in the open lineage family, we have strong class endogamy. People tend to marry within their social circle. Also, remarriage is quite common. Actually, something like at least 1/4 of all marriages are second and further marriages. Rich wives and also rich widows were very valuable. So if a woman was widowed and she was rich, she had no problem whatsoever finding a second husband. He could be even younger than herself. There was nothing strange or kind of laughed at this time about a younger, poorer man marrying a rich widow. There was a concept of marriage brokers, so the matchmakers, the professionals who would act as intermediaries between the families, telling them about the options of the people who might be willing to enter marriage, so they could help in making the choice for the families, not the children themselves. We have very distant affective relationships. Basically speaking, the spouses were not supposed to be in love. Very often in rich families, in aristocratic families, married couples had separate bedrooms and servants. Weddings were basically a transaction between the families, and the expectation on marital happiness was low. Nobody really expected to be happy because they married. Nobody was expected to be in love. This was a money transaction which the woman entered for economic protection, and her duty was to provide children. So this was basically it. Romantic love, sexual attraction, these were the subjects of poetry. And usually, if you have stories of great romantic passions, such as, I don't know, Tristan and Isolde, or Romeo and Juliet, these are cautionary stories. These are stories showing the dangers of romantic passion or huge sexual attraction, staying in the way of duty. Duty to your family, duty to your husband, whom you never chose. This was the subject of poetry, this was the subject of theatre. Some people perhaps dreamt of it, they wanted to experience this kind of passion in their life, but most people never encounter it. Sometimes, I would say fairly often, probably, some degree of affection developed after the marriage, so most of people were probably comfortable. I wouldn't say that almost everybody in this period was absolutely miserable in their private lives and they were deeply unhappy with their choice of spouse and absolutely detested the time spent with them. I would say probably knowing something about the human psychology, most people felt quite content, although not ecstatically happy. Happiness was not the most important aim in life. This is one of the greatest differences between, let's say, the society of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the contemporary ways of thinking about private life. Happiness is an 18th century invention. Before, this was seen as an obstacle to your duty, because the idea, the aim in life was to achieve religious salvation, basically. And you could achieve salvation by being an obedient and dutiful person, doing whatever was expected of you from your family, from your overlord, or whatever. So personal happiness was not a priority, definitely not. Another thing that Stone notices is that social relations, kind of casual relations with strangers in the street, between 15th and 17th centuries tended to be cool or even unfriendly. There was an extraordinary amount of casual violence. You could be attacked in the street, you could be mugged and robbed. There was no police. Police is the invention of the 19th century. Some early forms appear in the late 18th century, but before that, well, you would have to protect yourself. If you were not able to protect yourself, too bad. You were an easy target. There were gangs of young people attacking strangers, robbing them in the street. What is interesting, something that Stone notices, is that violence was far more frequently directed outside the family. People generally felt some sort of loyalty towards their family members because this was their most important insurance in life. Your family was your only protection in the world. In case of any misfortune, old age, illness, whatever, the only people you could really rely on were your family members. However authoritarian and unpleasant they were. So very few people had any kind of friendliness or hospitality left for strangers. Generally, people mistrusted strangers. So this is not the best time to be emotional within the family, and even less so with strangers. So looking for friends somewhere. No, unless you had some business relations or some sort of feudal land-related relations. Otherwise, quite remote. The same between parents and children. High mortality was a very important factor here. The longer that a child lived, the more attention they would get, but still they would be, for example, sent away quite young to be fostered out in other families or to learn a trade or to be wet-nursed. And so the babies would very often be sent away from the home to be wet-nursed. Some professions like domestic servants, and everybody relied on domestic servants if they had the money to employ them. So the youngest you could get employed as a domestic servant was around 10. So a child of 10 could be sent to work as a domestic servant. This was, at least according to the way that Stone presents it, you can read the chapter if you want. This was not a very happy time, and everything was about money and protection and fear and mistrust, and yeah, this was basically the way they lived. They were not unhappy, they didn't know any other life. There is something that Stone mentions at the end of this chapter, which I find quite interesting. The first thing I already mentioned is that personal happiness is not the most important thing in life for these people, and we just have to accept this, we just have to understand this, that people thought differently. The past is a foreign country, and people act differently, people think differently. They didn't have all the cultural baggage that we now have, all the philosophy that we use, even if we do not really know much about it. There are two more kind of modern Western preconceptions that may result in judging those early periods quite harshly. The first one is, according to Stone, that sex without love is immoral. Many people, definitely people from my generation, perhaps also from yours, think that sex without love is immoral. I think it's changing right now, and people are more likely to involve in sexual relations without very strong emotional attachment. But let's say late 20th century, the turn of the century, it was still common belief that you need to feel emotional attachment to ever involve in sexual relations. Those people? No. For most of them, any sex they had in life was without love, however we understand it, or even, let's say, strong attraction. Another thing, another modern Western preconception, marriage for property and not love is not better than prostitution. Again, nobody thought this way. You married for property. Love was a bad reason to be married, because it can pass and the property stays. So they didn't have divorce, so marriage was basically for life for both parties. There would be quite a lot of infidelity and perhaps abandonment, but marriage would go on, and marriage definitely was about property, and nobody would even think about it in terms similar to prostitution. They would, if anything, think that marriage for love is stupidity. So it's just the way that people thought. And now let's move on to the second model, the restricted patriarchal nuclear family between 1550 and 1700. So we continue in a moment.